There's a version of love that only shows up when it can be photographed, and a version that shows up at 4 in the morning smelling like hospital coffee. I spent 71 years learning the difference, but it took one Tuesday in October to learn who in my family belonged to which kind. Every family keeps a ledger even if nobody writes it down, who called on the bad days, who drove 2 hours in the rain, who sent a card and who sent themselves. Ours had been balanced for a long time, or so I thought, right up until the day I needed it to be. It was 6:47 on the morning of October the 14th, when the ledger finally came due, in a kitchen in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, with the coffee maker still gurgling and my wife of 46 years lying on the linoleum with her hip bent in a direction hips are not built to bend. Welcome to modern dramora. Get settled, this one's going to take you somewhere. Drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. Hit like, make sure you're subscribed. My name is Walter Briggs. I'm 71 years old. I spent 34 years supervising a postal distribution center in Cedar Hollow, Ohio, and I restore antique mantle clocks in my garage on Saturday mornings because the tick of something built to outlast me has always settled my nerves. My hands know brass and gear teeth better than they know most people, and there's a comfort in that I've never quite been able to explain to Alina, though she stopped trying to talk me out of the hobby years ago. I raised one son. I buried one brother. I thought for most of my adult life that keeping the peace in a family was the same thing as having peace in a family, that staying quiet, not pushing, letting things slide was its own kind of love. I found out on a kitchen floor in October that those are two very different things, and only one of them holds any weight when it actually matters. Alina had gone to get the newspaper off the porch, same as every morning for 11 years, and I heard the sound before I understood it, a short, flat crack, followed by a silence that had a shape to it, the way silence does when something has gone badly wrong. She was on the kitchen floor when I got to her, her right leg turned out at an angle I still see when I close my eyes, her face gray and sweating despite the October chill coming through the open door. The newspaper was still folded in her hand, rubber band and all, like some part of her had refused to let go of the ordinary even as everything else went wrong. "Walter," she said, very calm, the way she gets calm when things are their worst. "I think I broke something." The coffee maker kept gurgling behind me, oblivious, filling the kitchen with a smell that should have belonged to an ordinary Tuesday. I could hear a dog barking 2 yards over. I remember thinking, in the strange sideways way the mind moves in an emergency, that I still needed to take the trash cans to the curb, and then hating myself for thinking it while my wife lay on the floor in front of me. I called 911 at 6:51. I remember the dispatcher's voice, young, unbothered, asking me to confirm the address twice. I remember kneeling on the floor holding Alina's hand and telling her the ambulance was 4 minutes out, telling her to breathe slow, telling her I loved her, and I remember underneath all of it, my hands shaking in a way they hadn't shaken since I was a young man. The paramedics arrived at 6:58. 7 minutes that felt like 40, boots loud on the porch steps, radios crackling with numbers that meant nothing to me and everything to them. Alina was still conscious, gripping my hand hard enough to leave marks, when they lifted her onto the stretcher with the kind of practiced gentleness that only comes from having done it 1,000 times before. One of them, a young woman with a tight braid and steady hands, looked at me and said, "You did everything right, sir. Ride with us or follow behind, your choice." I followed behind. My hands were shaking too badly to trust myself in the ambulance, and somebody needed to lock the house and bring her insurance card. Before I left the driveway, I called our son. "Daniel," I said when he picked up on the 4th ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Your mother fell. They think it's her hip. I'm following the ambulance to St. Agnes now." There was a pause on the line, the kind of pause where you can hear someone sitting up in bed. "Is she how bad?" "Bad enough. I need you here, son." "I'm coming," he said. "Give me 20 minutes. I believed him. That's the part that still sits wrong in my chest, even now. I believed him completely. Daniel called back at 7:34. I was in the surgical waiting room at St. Agnes Regional, the fluorescent lights buzzing in that particular hospital frequency that gets into your teeth, a paper cup of vending machine coffee going cold in my hand, when my phone rang and I saw his name and I felt, for 1 second, the whole morning loosen its grip on my chest. "Dad," his voice had changed. It had gone careful, rehearsed, the voice of a man reading from a script somebody else had written for him. "Renee thinks we think it's better if I don't rush over there right this second. The kids have their fall festival at school at 9, and Renee's already got the volunteer shift covered, and if I bail now it throws off the whole morning for everybody." I stood in that waiting room holding the phone against my ear, and I said nothing for 3 full seconds because I was waiting for him to say, "But I'm coming after." He didn't say it. "Dad, you still there?" "I'm here," I said. "I'll come by this afternoon. Mom's in good hands, right? You said surgery's not till later." "They're prepping her now, Daniel. She's scared." "She asked for you by name." Another pause, and behind it, faintly, I heard a woman's voice in the background, not words I could make out, just tone, clipped and certain, the tone of someone who has already made a decision and is waiting for it to be carried out. "I'll be there this afternoon," Daniel said again, like repeating it made it truer. "I promise, Dad. Your mother's scared, Daniel. I know, Dad, this afternoon, okay. I have to go, Renee's calling me for something." The line went dead before I could answer. I sat there holding a phone that had gone quiet, in a waiting room that hadn't, surrounded by other families' fear, other families vending machine coffee, other families hushed in terrible patience. I hung up and sat back down in a hard plastic chair, and I did not cry, and I did not call him back to argue, because I have never in my life been a man who argues with a closed door. I just sat there, 71 years old, alone in a waiting room, while somewhere across town, my son helped run a bake sale table instead. At 8:15, the door to the waiting room opened, and Carol Whitfield walked in wearing a coat over her pajamas and carrying 2 cups of coffee she'd clearly bought at the gas station on the way, because the cups still had the little cardboard sleeves twisted crooked. Carol had lived across the street from us for 19 years. She and Alina traded tomato seedlings every spring and complained about the same raccoon every fall. I hadn't called her. She'd seen the ambulance lights reflected in her bedroom window at 7 in the morning and simply gotten dressed. "I'm not asking what happened," she said, pressing one of the coffees into my hand. "I'm asking what you need. I don't know yet," I admitted. "Then I'll sit here until you do." She sat down in the chair beside mine, coat still on, and she stayed there for the next 6 hours. She didn't check her phone. She didn't mention an inconvenience. When I finally asked her, hours later, if she needed to get back for anything, she just looked at me like the question didn't make sense. "That's what people do, Walter," she said. "When it matters, you show up. The rest sorts itself out later." I have thought about that sentence more times than I can count since. It is a small sentence. It carries more weight than most sermons I've sat through. Around noon, she went down to the cafeteria and came back with 2 sandwiches nobody had asked her to buy, because she'd decided correctly that neither of us had eaten. When Alina came out of recovery and Carol finally had to leave for her own evening plans, she stood in the doorway a moment and said, "Call me if anything changes, doesn't matter the hour," and I believed her, the way I hadn't quite managed to believe my own son that morning. Later I would think about the arithmetic of it. A neighbor who owed us nothing had given us 6 uninterrupted hours, while a son who owed us everything had given us a phone call and a promise for the afternoon. Alina came out of surgery at 1:20 that afternoon. Dr. Adiz Akafar, the orthopedic surgeon, found me in the waiting room still in yesterday's shirt and walked me through it in plain, careful language: a displaced femoral neck fracture, a partial hip replacement, 4 titanium screws, a 6 to 8 week recovery with physical therapy 3 times a week after that. "She did well," Dr. Akafar said. "For a woman her age with her bone density, this is about as clean a repair as we could hope for. She'll be groggy for a few hours yet. You can see her once she's settled in recovery, probably around 3. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it more than the words could carry. "Mr. Briggs." She paused at the door, and something in her face softened, the practiced warmth of someone who has delivered this particular kind of news to 100 families before mine. "The next 8 weeks matter more than the surgery did. She's going to need consistent help, someone in the house or close to it. Falls like this, the second one is usually worse than the first." I told her I understood. I asked what consistent help actually meant in practice, and she walked me through it plainly. Someone present for the first 2 weeks at minimum, help with bathing and meals until Alina could bear weight safely, a fall-proofed path from bedroom to bathroom, no stairs without a second person nearby. It was a longer list than I expected, and I wrote it on the back of a hospital pamphlet with a pen I never returned to the front desk. I did not tell Dr. Akafar that the one person who should have been standing beside me hearing this had chosen a school bake sale instead. Some things you carry alone until you're ready to set them down. Daniel arrived at 4:40 that afternoon, 9 hours after the fall, alone, without the children, smelling faintly of powdered sugar from the festival. He hugged me stiffly in the hallway outside Alina's room and said, "I'm sorry, Dad, it was just, this morning was already so scheduled. You know how Renee gets about the kids' commitments." I looked at my son's face and saw, for the first time clearly, a man who had learned to apologize for things without changing them. If this story's hitting close to home already, go ahead and hit that subscribe button now, so you don't miss where this one ends up. Trust me, it's worth the ride. Alina came home on October the 18th, 4 days after the fall, with a walker she hated, and a home health aide named Denise who came 3 mornings a week to help with the exercises the physical therapist had assigned. I learned to do things that fall I hadn't done in years: cook 3 meals a day, manage a pill schedule taped to the refrigerator, help my wife of 46 years in and out of the shower without either of us mentioning how strange it felt. Daniel called most evenings, brief calls, 10 minutes at most, always with the television murmuring behind him and always ending the same way. Tell Mom I love her. We'll get down there soon once things settle. Things never quite settled. Renee had a listing that closed the last week of October, then a school fundraiser the first week of November, then a work conference the second. Each reason was small and plausible on its own. Stacked together across 5 weeks, they added up to something that stopped looking like coincidence and started looking like a decision nobody had said out loud yet. I didn't push. I told myself people get busy, that a 9-year-old's soccer schedule is a real thing and not an excuse, that I had raised Daniel to keep his word and he would, eventually, once the timing worked out. I believed my own patience was a virtue. It took Renee's visit to my kitchen table to show me it had actually just been blindness. There's a particular kind of tired that comes from caregiving, one nobody warns you about until you're living inside it. By the end of that first week, I was waking at 5 to manage Alina's morning pills, spending an hour helping her through exercises the physical therapist had written out on a laminated card, and falling asleep most nights in the recliner by the window because I didn't trust myself to hear her if she called out from the bedroom. The physical therapist, a broad-shouldered young man named Trevor with an easy laugh, came Tuesdays and Thursdays and always asked the same question on his way out the door. Any other hands in the house helping out, Mr. Briggs? Doesn't have to be all on you. Just me, I told him every time until the third week, when Carol started coming by most afternoons to sit with Alina so I could nap or run errands or simply stand in the backyard for 10 minutes and remember what my own thoughts sounded like. Daniel never asked Trevor's question. He never asked what the days actually looked like, hour to hour, inside that house. I don't think it occurred to him that there was an hour to hour to ask about at all. It was 3 days later in our own kitchen that I understood the fall festival had never been the real reason. Renee came by that Friday evening, alone, while Daniel was picking the kids up from soccer. She sat at my kitchen table, the same table Elena and I had eaten breakfast at for 22 years, and she folded her hands in front of her in a way that told me this was a meeting she had rehearsed. How's Alina settling in? She asked, though her eyes were already moving around the kitchen, cataloging. Slowly, I said. She's home now, sleeping a lot. The physical therapist starts Monday. Good. A pause. Walter, I wanted to talk to you about something, and I think now's actually a decent time, since we're just the two of us. All right, Daniel and I have been talking to a financial planner about the kids' futures. Madison's 12 now, Cole's 9, and college costs the way they're going. We really need to start thinking seriously. And obviously the lake house has been sitting there since your brother passed, and it seems like the responsible thing, honestly, would be to put it into a trust for the kids now, while you and Alina are both, well, while things are stable. I set down my coffee cup very carefully, because I could feel my hand wanting to shake again, and I did not want her to see it. Alina just had major surgery, Renee. We're figuring out home care, physical therapy, the whole cost of that. I'm not signing over a piece of property this week. Her mouth did something small and controlled. I'm not asking you to sign it over this week. I'm asking you to commit to the idea. Because if you and Alina end up needing that equity for care, for a facility, whatever comes, there won't be anything left for the kids at all. I'm just trying to protect them. You're trying to protect them from their own grandparents needing help, I said. That's what you're describing. She looked at me across that table, and here's the line I will remember for the rest of my life, delivered as flat and certain as a weather report. I'm not going to apologize for putting my children first, Walter. That's not a crime. Maybe it's time somebody in this family thought about the next generation instead of the current one. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't stand up. I sat very still, the way I imagine a man sits still when he's just watched a door close from the inside, and I said, I think you should go home now, Renee. She left. 2 weeks later, when I called to arrange a Sunday visit with Madison and Cole, Renee told me the kids had a lot going on, and it wasn't really a good stretch. 3 Sundays after that, the same. By November, she had stopped answering my calls at all, and Daniel had stopped calling back within the day. I told Alina everything that same night, sitting on the edge of our bed while she iced her hip, and when I finished she was quiet for a long time, longer than I expected. Alina Marie Briggs, I said finally, using her full name the way I only ever do when something is serious. I am not going to spend the next however many years begging our son's wife for permission to see our grandchildren. I know, she said. I want to lay it out, not to fight, just so I can see it clearly myself before I decide what to do about it. So I did, out loud in our bedroom with the ice pack sweating a ring onto the nightstand. I counted it the way you'd count anything else that needed counting. October the 14th, the morning of the fall, when Renee kept our son at a school festival instead. The 2 weeks after, when every offer of help arrived a day late and an excuse short. The kitchen table conversation, the lake house, the sentence about protecting the next generation instead of the current one. The 63 days and counting since we'd last held our grandchildren. Every phone call that went to voicemail, every Sunday visit canceled with less than a day's notice. That's the ledger, I said. That's the whole thing, plain as I can make it. I paused and then added the last entry, the one that had been sitting heaviest under all the others. And underneath every single one of those is the same sentence, over and over. I'm not going to apologize for putting my children first. As if the rest of us had ever asked her to apologize for anything. As if protecting 2 kids from a threat that didn't exist was worth 2 months of their grandmother's recovery happening without them in the room. Alina reached over and took my hand, the same hand she'd gripped on the kitchen floor 2 months before. Then you know what you need to do. I'm not going to yell at her, Alina. That's not who I am. I know that too, she said. You've never needed to raise your voice to be right, Walter. You just need to be clear. My older brother Michael spent 31 years as a family court judge before he retired, and if there is one man on this earth whose calm I have always tried, and mostly failed, to imitate, it's him. I drove the 90 minutes to his place outside Millhaven on a Sunday in late November, and I told him everything, the fall, the phone call, the fall festival, the kitchen table conversation, the silence since. He listened without interrupting, which is a rarer gift than people give it credit for. When I finished, he poured us both coffee and sat down across from me at his own kitchen table, and he was quiet for a long moment. What do you need? He finally asked, 4 words. No lecture, no outrage on my behalf, no advice I hadn't asked for. I don't know yet, I admitted, the same words I'd said to Carol 2 months earlier in that hospital waiting room. I just know I'm not going to beg for access to my own grandchildren. I've never begged anyone for anything in 71 years, and I'm not about to start over Lake House nobody's even trying to take from her. Then don't beg, Michael said. Find out what you're actually dealing with first. People don't cut off grandparents over nothing, Walter. There's always a ledger underneath it somewhere. Find yours. You spent 30 years watching families do this to each other in your courtroom, I said. Doesn't it ever get easier to see coming? He shook his head, turning his coffee cup slowly on the table. Never once. What I did learn is that the families who healed weren't the ones who yelled loudest. They were the ones who eventually stopped guessing and started checking. Facts don't need volume, Walter. They just need to be true and said plainly in front of the right people. It was as close to a plan as my brother was ever going to hand me, and it turned out to be exactly enough. It took me 3 weeks of quiet, careful work to find it, and the truth is I didn't have to dig nearly as deep as I expected, because most of what mattered had been sitting in a folder in my own filing cabinet the entire time. In 2019, 4 years earlier, Alina and I had sat down with an estate attorney named Priya Chandrasekaran and set up 2 things neither Daniel nor Renee had ever been told about, because we hadn't seen a reason to announce it. An irrevocable trust funding both grandchildren's college education, seated with $41,000 each and growing on a fixed schedule regardless of what happened to any other asset we owned. And a separate provision in our will stating plainly that the lake house, the one Renee wanted signed over immediately, was to pass jointly to Daniel and to my late brother's daughter, my niece Grace, who had spent every summer of her childhood there, and not one day since arguing about who deserved it more. I spent an afternoon on the phone confirming what the folder already told me, because I wanted no room left for doubt when the moment came to lay it on the table. A call to the trust's fund administrator confirmed the account balance is $43,210 for Madison, $41,950 for Cole, both compounding on a fixed quarterly schedule untouched by anything happening in our family that fall. A second call to Priya's paralegal confirmed the recorded date on the Lake House provision, March 3, 2019, notarized, filed, unambiguous. Renee's entire case, the case she'd built her cruelty on, rested on a fear that didn't exist. The kid's education was already secure. The Lake House was never fully Daniel's to inherit alone in the first place. She had spent 2 months punishing an old man for a threat that had been solved half a decade before she ever thought to raise it. I called Priya's office and made an appointment. Not to change anything about the trust, that part was already exactly as it should be. I wanted something else from her. Documentation printed and dated of exactly when each provision had been established, and a letter confirming that no version of our estate plan, past or present, had ever depended on Renee's cooperation, her approval, or her permission to see her own children's grandfather. You understand, Priya said, sliding the folder across her desk to me, that you don't owe anyone an explanation for decisions you made 5 years ago. I know, I said. But some people only believe what's in front of them in black and white. I'd rather she read it than argue with me about it. Priya's office smelled faintly of the peppermint candies she kept in a dish on her desk, and through the window behind her I could see the courthouse across the street, its flag hanging still in the windless December air. She pulled a second folder from her cabinet, this one thicker, and set it beside the first. "There's something else you should see while you're here," she said. "Your brother's original letter, the one he wrote when he set up the lake house provision. He was specific about wanting it kept in the family that actually used it, not just the family that happened to share his last name. I don't think you've read it in years." I hadn't. I read it there in her office, my brother's handwriting slanted and familiar, and it settled something in me I hadn't known was still unsettled. Before Christmas, I drove out to see my niece Grace, 34 now, married with a toddler of her own, living 40 minutes north in the same town where she and her father used to spend every August at the lake house. I hadn't told her yet what was happening with Daniel and Renee. I wanted to hear, without prompting her, what the place still meant to her. We sat on her porch in the cold with mugs of coffee going lukewarm between us, and she talked for 20 minutes about the dock her father had rebuilt with his own hands, about learning to swim off that same dock at 6 years old, about bringing her own daughter there last summer for the first time, and watching her father's absence and presence both live in the same water. "I don't need to own it," Grace said. "I just don't ever want it sold to a stranger or fought over like it's just a number on a piece of paper. It was never just a number to your brother." "It isn't going to be sold," I told her. "And it isn't going to be fought over either, I'm making sure of that." Grace studied my face for a moment, the way people do when they sense there's a longer story sitting behind a short answer, but she didn't push, and I loved her a little more for that restraint. I didn't tell her the rest that day. I wanted the documents finished first, wanted everything printed and dated and undeniable, before I said another word to anyone about what Renee had done with 2 months that belonged, by every right, to 2 children and their grandmother. By the time Christmas arrived, Alina was walking again with a cane, slower than before but steady, and we had not seen Madison or Cole in 63 days. 63 days is a long time to a 9-year-old. It is an even longer time to a grandmother recovering from surgery who used to babysit them every Thursday, who kept a running list on the refrigerator of books she wanted to read them next, who had, without ever saying so out loud, started to wonder if her grandchildren were being taught to think of her as optional. I marked the days without meaning to. I'd catch myself doing the math in the truck, at the grocery store, lying awake at 11 at night, 41 days, 48 days, 55. Alina never asked me to stop, and I never explained why I did it. I think we both understood it was the only ledger either of us was keeping out loud, even if only to ourselves. Daniel called on December 20th to say they'd still be coming to Christmas dinner. Renee had come around, in his words, on the idea of one visit, provided nobody brought up the money stuff. I agreed. I did not agree because I intended to keep quiet. I agreed because I wanted them all in the same room, at the same table at the same time, so that whatever happened next would happen in front of everyone who needed to hear it. Carol came too, same as every year. Michael drove up from Millhaven. Alina set the table herself, slower than usual, refusing my help with the good plates because some things a woman insists on doing with her own hands even 8 weeks out from surgery. Daniel and Renee arrived at 4 with Madison and Cole, who ran straight for their grandmother and wrapped themselves around her waist like they'd never been kept away at all, because children don't hold grudges the way adults engineer them. Renee stood in the doorway a beat longer, her coat still on, taking in the table, taking in Michael, taking in Carol, taking in the folder sitting closed beside my place setting at the head of the table. I watched something flicker across her face. Confidence first, the same confidence she'd worn at my kitchen table in October. Then, seeing the folder, something closer to calculation, the look of a woman recounting her own story to herself to make sure it still held together. "Everything okay?" Daniel asked, glancing between his father and his wife, already sensing the room had a temperature it hadn't had a minute before. "Everything's fine," I said. "Sit down, both of you, let's eat." We did. Alina asked Madison about her school play. Michael told a story about a case from 20 years back that had the table laughing despite itself. Carol complimented the ham 3 separate times, which is her way of saying she loves you. Underneath all of it, I could feel Renee watching that closed folder the way you watch a pot you're not sure is about to boil. We ate. We made the kind of small talk families make when everyone at the table is carrying something they haven't said out loud yet. It was over dessert, with the kids excused to the living room and the television murmuring a Christmas special 2 rooms away, that I finally opened the folder. "I want to say something," I said, "and I want to say it once calmly, and then we can decide together where we go from here." Renee's fork paused over her pie. Daniel looked between us, already bracing. "In October, the morning your mother fell, I called for help and I was told the fall festival mattered more. I understand people schedule things. I understand mornings are hard. What I didn't understand, what took me weeks to understand, was that the real reason had nothing to do with a bake sale. I slid the first document across the table to Renee. She didn't pick it up. This is a trust established in 2019 funding Madison's and Cole's college education. It's already fully in place. It doesn't depend on the lake house. It never has. I slid the second document beside it. This is our estate provision on the lake house itself. It was never going to be Daniel's alone to leave to your children uncontested. It was always meant to be shared with my niece Grace, the way my brother wanted it kept in the family that raised her. The room had gone very quiet. Renee picked up the first document at last, her eyes moving fast across it, then slower, then back to the top as if the numbers might rearrange themselves into something more forgiving on a second read. Her jaw tightened. Her shoulders, which had come into that dinner set high and certain, dropped by degrees. The posture of someone watching a structure they'd built come apart at a joint they hadn't known was load-bearing. This was already funded, she said quietly, not quite a question. Since 2019, I said, before Cole could even spell his own name. Her face was doing the thing Dr. Acker's face had never done, moving from certainty to confusion, to the slow, cold arithmetic of someone recalculating everything they'd built on a foundation that had never existed. You cut my grandchildren off from me, I said, my voice steady, not raised, over a threat that was solved 5 years before you ever mentioned it. 63 days, Renee. Your mother-in-law recovered from a broken hip without her grandchildren in the house because you were protecting them from a fight that was already finished. I didn't know, Renee said quietly, and for the first time since October, there was no rehearsal in her voice. I know you didn't, I said. That's exactly the point. You made a decision that cost 2 children their grandparents for 2 months based on something you never bothered to ask about. You didn't check. You decided and you made everyone else live inside that decision. Daniel wasn't looking at his wife anymore. He was looking at the folder, and something in his jaw had gone tight and ashamed. The look of a man doing the arithmetic on his own silence these past months, on every call he hadn't returned within the day, every visit he'd let Renee cancel without argument. Dad, he said, I should have come that morning. I knew it the second I hung up the phone, and I've known it every day since. I let Renee's version of things become my version of things, and that's on me, not just her. Renee did not storm out. She sat very still, the way I had sat still in my own kitchen 2 months before, and when she finally spoke again, her voice had lost every bit of its certainty. I thought I was protecting them, she said. I really did. I thought if I didn't hold the line on something, everything would just get taken care of the way it always is, and nobody would think about what the kids actually needed. They needed their grandmother, I said. That's what they needed. Everything else was a fiction you built because you were scared, and instead of asking, you punished. Nobody applauded. Nobody stood up and shouted. The consequence, when it came, was quieter than that and more lasting. Daniel spoke first, once the silence had stretched long enough that someone had to. We're doing weekly visits starting this week. No conditions. No canceling for a listing or a fundraiser. If something real comes up, we call ahead, same as any family does. He looked at Renee. That's not a discussion. That's what's happening. Renee nodded, and for once she didn't argue the terms. I'll find us a family counselor, she said, her voice smaller than I had ever heard it. Not because anyone's forcing me to. Because I think I need to understand why I did what I did before I trust myself not to do it again. Michael, who had spent 3 decades watching families come apart and occasionally watching them put themselves back together, wrote a name and a phone number on a paper napkin and slid it across the table without a word, the way a man hands over exactly what's needed and nothing more. The lake house stayed exactly as a leaner, and I had always intended it split, shared, untouched by the argument that had almost cost us 2 months with our grandchildren over nothing at all. Grace would keep her summers there. Daniel and his children would keep theirs. Nobody's name would ever again be used as a threat against anybody else's. Carol caught my eye from across the table as Michael refilled everyone's coffee, and she gave me the smallest nod, the kind 2 people share when they both know exactly what just happened and don't need to discuss it further. Later at the door, she squeezed my hand once hard, the same way Alina had gripped it on the kitchen floor back in October, and said only, "Good," before pulling her coat tighter and stepping out into the cold. It's February now. Alina walks without the cane most days. Madison and Cole come every Thursday again, same as before, and Cole has taken an interest in my clock bench, small, careful hands learning to set a mainspring the way I learned from my own father 60 years ago. Renee still comes to dinner. She's quieter than she used to be, more careful with her words, and once unprompted, she thanked me for not humiliating her in front of the kids that Christmas night, for choosing documents over a shouting match. I told her the truth. I never wanted to win an argument with her. I wanted my grandchildren back at my table, and the only way to get there was to make sure the truth was too plain to keep arguing against. Some evenings, when Cole is out in the garage with me and Alina is reading in the front room with the cane leaned against her chair, unused more days than not now, I think about how close we came to letting 63 days become 600 or 6,000, simply because I was raised to believe that patience and forgiveness meant staying quiet. Michael was right about one thing above all the rest. There's always a ledger underneath a silence like that. The only question is whether you're willing to open it and look. Grace brings her daughter up to the lake house every August now, same as she always did, and last summer Madison and Cole came too, cousins meeting properly for the first time on the same dock my brother built with his own 2 hands. Nobody argued about whose name was on the deed. Nobody needed to. A family's ledger doesn't balance itself, and it doesn't forgive silently either. It balances because somebody eventually sets it down on the table in the light and says, "Here's what was owed, and here's what was paid, and here's what we do now that we can finally see it clearly." If you enjoyed this story, hit that like button, subscribe, and drop a comment below. Let me know where you're watching from. I'll see you on the next one.